Okay, so the topic of my talk is how to build a consultancy that people actually enjoy working for. For some people, this might seem like a strange topic, but because it seems a bit as if we were giving away our trade secrets. But I think it's actually an interesting topic to reflect upon, and I think it's interesting to have some discussions about this. So I will talk about some of the things that we value, that we at InnoQ like to do, and that we believe are good in attracting employees and, more importantly, keeping them happy employees. I know that many of our employees are listening to this, so it'll be very interesting to have some discussion with them. Am I exaggerating things? Am I painting a wrong picture? I hope I'm not. And it will also be very interesting to talk to partners and clients and other people in this industry to see how much of what I talk about is useful for you, possibly in your organizations, how many of the things that I talk about are actually the cause of problems in your respective organizations. And so please take this as sort of the starting point for some discussion. I don't claim that I know all of the answers. I'm just basically talking a little bit about what we have learned. So take it with a grain of salt, as you should do with any sort of advice, especially if it's given to you by consultants. And let me dive right into what InnoQ is and what we actually do. So I considered a while whether I want to approach this from the employer side or from the employee side. And then I decided to focus on the employer because I think the sort of employee view is implied. So the talk is structured so that I give advice to potential employers. If you were to build a consultancy, this would be our advice, right? This is what we learned during the past 20 years, what we believe works very, very well. As an employee, you can sort of use it to judge, or judge is maybe too harsh a word, to form an opinion about a potential employer. I'm not saying every employer has to do everything that I'm saying here. I'm not even sure every employer can, even if they wanted to. But it might be interesting to consider a potential employer against this sort of value system and maybe question whether they have a different one, a better one, or just one that matches their particular needs or circumstances better than as if they blindly applied something like the stuff that I talked about here. Okay, so let me start with the employer advice, right? So this is my general advice. It's got nothing to do with employees, except I think it does. So the first sort of value statement that I like to emphasize is that I strongly think it's a good idea to favor sustainable long-term relationships over short-term profit. And that may sound, like I'm standing on a high ground trying to talk about morals and ethics. Well, maybe I will do that, but it's not, even if I weren't doing that, this, to my view, makes perfect business sense. Unless your goal is to make the most of the next 6 months or maybe the next 12 months, your goal should be to create something that sustains its value over a longer course of time, because that is what's important to create profit next year and the year after that as well, right? If you do something right now that will give you immediate profit but hurt you in the long run, it's not a good investment. It's simply not a good choice to do those things from a pure commercial business point of view. Without the ethics, and that is something that I like a lot. I love it when something that makes commercial sense also is very good in a moral and ethical kind of sense, right? Because that is the easiest decision that you can make. It's so easy to say, well, that's a good thing to do, and it also will make us a lot of money in the long run. Those are very good decisions that everybody should love, I think. So you should favor those sustainable long-term relationships, or you can rephrase it and say, well, don't screw your business partners, whether it's your clients or your business partners in other senses, right? Somebody who provides a service for you, somebody who delivers something to you, whatever it is. Don't mess around with their expectations. Don't screw them. Don't disadvantage them in any way, because in the long run this will always hurt you. Being a good partner is a good strategy for becoming a successful long-term business. So I think that is a crucial thing. Again, I apply this and we apply this to every sort of business relationship that we have, and it's true for employees, you will see that later on, as well as for clients and suppliers and everybody else within the ecosystem that you're living in. So that's my first piece of advice. My second piece of advice might seem strange when I'm talking about an employer and their employees and all this job thing. I think it's very important. Even if you have a value system, even if you believe that you want to do the best thing for your employees, to recognize that you are not your employee's life, right? I think being passionate about your job is a very good thing. Liking your job is very important. Being interested in your job makes it so much better than if you do something that you hate. I love it when people can love their jobs. But I love it even more if they have something else beside work that's important to them as well. And I think that is sort of a prerequisite for a healthy relationship with the outside world, right? You want to have passionate employees, but you want them to have a life. And you want to address that, or you want to support that by making sure that they can actually develop a life of their own. If they're young people who start early on with your company, they're very likely very motivated and they would love to spend 80 hours a week with the job because it's so much fun. And that's sort of okay, but it's only okay if it is something that they actually, maybe not 80 hours, but maybe 50 or 60, if that's something that they want to do because they have fun with it, that's perfectly fine. But you cannot rely on that or expect it. And you should not demand it even implicitly. You should never create a situation where people feel that this other person is so much more valuable to the company because they don't have a life and can spend 20 or 40 hours more a week with the job. That is really, really unhealthy in the long run. Again, it may help you for 6 months because you have people who work twice as much for the same amount of money, but in the long run, those people will not develop a healthy relationship with the job. So it's important to see both things. Again, I'm not saying that people should not be interested in what they're doing. I'm not saying they shouldn't be spending time with maybe IT-related stuff outside of their job. Basically, I think everybody will do that to a certain degree, but you can never demand it and you should never expect it. So that is an important aspect here. And this will show in many aspects of the company dealing with its employees, implicitly and explicitly. People will recognize whether you value them only for the work they do or if you value them as a person and actually think that what they do outside of work has value as well. So, next one. Strongly related to that is valuing families. Not everybody has a family. Well, everybody has, but not everybody has a very active family life or has a great connection to their family or has kids or a partner or whatever. But if they have families, and most of them do, or if they want to start a family, then that is something that's a good thing. Deciding to support employees only in that phase, between maybe they're finishing university and starting a family. If you only value them in that short amount of time, you're missing out, right? It's very valuable to be able to support and to work with people who do have a family, who have responsibilities outside of work, who are mothers and fathers and who have to take care of their kids, who have to take them to kindergarten in the morning and take them from school at lunch. That is a normal thing in life. It's related, of course, to the respect life beyond the job thing. But I also think you can and you should be very actively supportive of families. Try to give them all the extra leave that they need. Be happy if your female employees get pregnant. Be happy if people want to take time off to spend it with their kids. This all supports their life. It all supports a healthy relationship with the world. It is something that you should see as a completely 100% positive thing. If you as an employer get annoyed because people want to spend time with their kids and family, something's wrong, seriously wrong with your expectation of the outside world. And again, this might seem like a moral thing, an ethical thing, maybe if a religiously supported thing to do. Maybe that's why it's important to you, and that's perfectly fine. But I also think it is a very, very reasonable commercial thing to do. In a purely egoistic sense, from the company's point of view, it makes sense for a company to have employees who stay for a long time, who like working there, who don't feel pressured into changing jobs because their employer doesn't support them in the phase of their life where their family is the most important thing. For some people, that's their whole life, and that's perfectly okay. And you don't own them, and you should be supportive of their outside life and their outside families. So those are sort of very general remarks. They're very much on the human side of things, and they're not really related to being a technology company, right? This is all of what I just said is true in any kind of business, in any kind of industry. It is not related to IT consultancies in any particular way. So let me move to some of those things, and let me go right straight from the most human thing that we could talk about to something that is very technical indeed, which is equipment. Now, that might seem weird, but I remember this very strongly myself. When I started out, this was a very, very important thing to me, and when I changed jobs, it was a very important thing to me. And I know this from many people. You want to work with good tools. That is probably true if you're a crafts person. You want to use the right tools, the right hammer, the right screwdriver, the power tools, whatever it is. But of course, the same is true for software developers and consultants as well, right? You want to have good equipment. There's nothing more frustrating than working with age-old hardware because somebody wanted to save a little bit of money. There's nothing more frustrating than seeing that you cannot do the best work you could do because you're not in a position in the hierarchy that merits a particular kind of device. So I've seen that with some organizations, with some of our clients even, where managers get better hardware than developers, which is completely ridiculous. Right? So the way we do it at InnoQ is basically everybody gets whatever they want. That sounds a little harsh. That's not 100% true. Everybody gets the equipment related to their work that is the best possible thing that they can ask for. So if everybody at InnoQ gets a laptop computer, whether that's a Mac or a Windows machine or a Linux machine is their choice. But whatever they pick, they just are supposed to pick professional hardware, and they pick the best machine that they can find and buy. That makes sense for them. Smaller one, bigger one, but always maxed out in terms of RAM, mostly maxed out in terms of mass storage, because it makes sense. It makes sense for people to have good equipment. Now that's sort of a very obvious statement, but what often happens is that people want to save a bit of money, and if you can save a lot of money with that, right? You could decide, well, those Apple computers are too expensive for us. We'll not do Mac. We'll do something else. And you would save quite a bit of money. Those things are really, really, really expensive. You could save quite a bit of money every year by cutting down on that. But the amount of frustration you create is not worth the money saved. It's a bad choice. It's a bad choice to save money there because this will hurt you. And the same is true for everything else as well. Whether it's a smartphone, everybody here has a top-notch smartphone that gets exchanged every 2 years if people want to for a newer model. Everybody has support the things around like the monitors in the offices or at home or both, depends on the situation, with decent external stuff like keyboards and external storage device for backup, whatever it is, right? When you need something, you get whatever is reasonable and whatever makes the most sense for you to do that. A former colleague of mine had this way of phrasing things. It's super hard to motivate people. It's really, really hard to spend money on something that is motivating. But it's extremely easy to save money and demotivate people. That is very, very easy. So don't fall into that trap because it's almost never worth it. So equipment is one of those things where I think one of the reasons we do this differently at InnoQ is because the people who founded it, including myself, had the opposite experience in the past. With past employers, it was a horrible disaster to get any decent piece of hardware. It was always a fight, and that is completely demotivating and doesn't help the business or the person at all. In a similar vein, it is a very, very stupid idea to save on education. If people want to get educated, if people want to learn something new, you should support that with every means possible, right? This doesn't necessarily have to be expensive training courses like the ones we offer. That is one option. You can do that, but you don't have to do that, right? I'm not saying our training courses are expensive. I'm just saying it's a decent amount of money to spend, and that is just one way. But some people learn that way. Other people learn best by teaching others, right? The best chance they get to learn something is if they get some time to prepare a good presentation, or maybe even a training course on something that they then teach others. That's the best way for them to learn. Others learn best if they're left alone for a while and can just, play around with stuff and try things out and figure out how this thing works by spending time with it. All of those ways are perfectly fine. And what we've found with us is that many of us benefit strongly from interaction with others when it comes to learning. So one thing we emphasize a lot is the interaction of people to figure out something together, right? To have discussions about things, to try out things together, where one person presents one aspect, another person presents another aspect, then they have a long discussion about what it is that they could do with that, and then they revisit that a few months later. So having this discussion, having this continuous debate in a positive sense about what makes sense in what situation and what this new thing could offer, this is all very, very useful to us to provide benefit to our partners, to the market, to our clients, right? One of the major reasons people choose InnoQ because we're very good at new technology, and that's true for both clients as well as new employees, right? They come to us because we have this reputation of that, and that only happens because the people who work here have all of this interaction, all of this interest in what they're doing, and that is very strongly related to this. You might have different organizational ways of doing this. You might have a budget per person. You might have a personal development plan. We don't have those things. I'm not saying they're bad or that we maybe won't have them in the future. At the moment, we don't. But whatever it is, you should value education very highly. The next aspect that I want to emphasize is that we are a people business. That's sort of a standard thing to say. And for that reason alone, we make sure we let employees speak for the company. So I'm one of the very few C-level people at InnoQ, and I speak a lot. I talk at conferences and I do lots of presentations, and I'm always happy to, talk to anybody about anything related to InnoQ or any of the technologies that I'm familiar with. But that is not my exclusive domain, and that is extremely important to us. Everybody who's employed at InnoQ has a chance to speak for the company. Some of our employees do that because they write blog posts, articles. Some of them write books. A lot of them do conference talks. A lot of them do trainings. But everybody is allowed to be a visible aspect of the company to the outside world. InnoQ's reputation is the visibility of all of its employees in this ecosystem. And that was something that we tried very early on and made an effort to increase. We made an effort to increase the number of people who were visible, and that works extremely well. It works perfectly well. It's, again, not a trade secret, but it's just, something that I want to point out. For us, it's been a fantastic ride because we're so visible now that people really ask us for advice and come to us with projects simply because they know about us. They don't know about us because we have such fantastic marketing. We do have fantastic marketing, but marketing in the sense of somebody writing about something is not all, right? We have so much content, so many things. That is a very important aspect of how the company works. And it also creates a lot of satisfaction for the people who do that because they don't have to be afraid to publish something. They don't have to go to someone to get approval from the press office before something is published somewhere. We're happy to take a risk there. We're happy to let employees publish something. And if in some rare occasion somebody writes something that has some sort of problem, maybe something trivial like somebody publishes something and it's full of typos and grammatical mistakes. I mean, what's the damage that could happen? I mean, somebody would pick it up immediately because not everybody, but lots of people read what the others write. So somebody would pick it up and say, "Oh, look, there's a bunch of typos in there," and they would go to the GitHub repository where our articles sit, and they would simply send them a merge request for the patches, which would typically be accepted within a few minutes. So let's say for an hour or so, we have an article out there that's full of typos, technically probably correct, but with a lot of typos in there. That's perfectly fine. We risk that hour because we don't want to have that restriction there. Typically, it doesn't happen that way, right? Because people have this internal discussion as well. People publish something, but before they publish it, they want to have feedback. They share the draft internally, not because they have to, not because they need to get approval, but because they value their colleagues' feedback. So they get feedback from their colleagues, they incorporate it, they publish it, the article is better for it, the content, whatever it is better for it. And the same is true for all the other things as well. The books that people write are discussed internally, conference talks are given internally. People have lots of discussions, provide lots of feedback to improve things for the outside world. So these things really go together to create this level of content-driven marketing that we actually do. So that has been one of the best things that we've discovered in our company's history. It makes a lot of sense to let people publish, to let people speak for the company, and to try to make it as easy as possible for them to do that. Another thing that I want to point out is something that we don't do and have never done, which is we've never paid for employee referrals. So how does hiring work at InnoQ? You might have noticed that we almost never publish job ads, at least not for the core roles, right? If we're looking for somebody like a marketing person or a salesperson, or maybe a sysadmin, or if it's a geographical region where we don't have enough people and think we should increase specifically there, then occasionally we run a job ad somewhere, mostly publishing it on the website and then linking to it from various social media things and sending an email around to our employees. Do you know somebody who might fit that role? But most of the time, 95% of the time, employees join InnoQ or find potential employees find InnoQ for other reasons, right? They find us because they've seen a talk that we provided, because they've seen us work somewhere, because they talked to somebody at a meetup, at a user group. They've noticed us and they've researched a bit and they've looked at this company and said, well, that looks kind of interesting. Again, the openness to the outside world helps. The fact that everybody can talk about the company and the fact that we talk a lot about culture and internal things like this very talk here is something that makes people interested to find out more about the company. So the vast majority of the job applications that we get are simply from people who send us something to jobs@innoq.com. And then we enter into a discussion, have our own little internal lightweight process, and maybe the person ends up working for us. But we've never had anybody. We've never had to motivate anybody to refer people to us with monetary incentives or other incentives like that, because our employees, if they're happy at the company, will recommend the company to other people, right? So that is the second most important thing. The vast majority of the incoming job applications comes because people just find us, but a significant number of people just are recommended, right? So an employee will say, well, I have this person that I know, I think he or she might be a great addition. Does it make sense for them to send something right now, or are we not hiring at the moment? Sometimes a question like that comes. Most of the time people know that we're hiring because we're almost always hiring. So people will recommend even without a referral fee or a referral incentive of some kind, right? So we don't have to pay for it and we don't want to do it. We also don't want to create an incentive. We don't want to motivate employees to send somebody for us because they get some extra value out of it. I mean, they get extra value out of it because somebody that they value will hopefully work at the company, maybe even work together with them in some project or other. That is the reason, and that's the only reason they should be recommending them to work for InnoQ in both directions. That's the only reason they should recommend the person to get in touch with InnoQ, as well as to tell InnoQ will to take a look at this particular person. That's an important aspect, so I wanted to point that out as well. And I think it's related, and in fact strongly related, most of the things that I've said so far, to trusting people. Right? We place a lot of trust in our employees. And the very cool thing is it's not, you know, disappointed. It's not, we don't have a problem. We never ran into a problem because we trusted somebody and they misused it. There are so many things where we don't have rules because we trust people to do the right thing. Like, for example, planning their vacation, right? People don't have to send in a vacation application where I want to have my vacation at that particular time. Can you please sign up? Why would we do that? We don't want to waste time reviewing applications for taking your vacation. I mean, you know how many days you have per year. You just take them whenever it makes sense among the commitments and projects that you're currently involved with. That works exceptionally well. People manage that very, very well. The same is true for almost everything else, like spending company money. Why would you create complicated rule books and guidelines about how to spend company money when it's so much easier to say, well, spend the company's money on stuff that makes sense. Do that if you think that it's okay. Do that without asking anybody. And if it's something where you're not sure, well, just ask and say, well, is it okay? I'm unsure. I don't know. Is this worth it or not? And then somebody will make a decision very quickly. So we really want to make sure that people are empowered to do as much as possible without having to ask for permission. Very, very, very rarely, again, like with the typo example in the article, very rarely something happens we say, oh, actually, we're not that happy with that, right? It would have been nicer if we had discussed this before, but that is okay. I mean, the consequence of this not having a rule is that sometimes you have to accept that you have to handle those exceptions, and then you handle them. I mean, that's still much less work than creating the complicated rules and enforcing them and frustrating everyone again. So trust is a time saver and a cost saver, and reduces frustration dramatically. So again, it makes good business sense, right? It's also nice because it makes working so much nicer and collaborating so much nicer. But it's also, again, something that saves money and that is a useful thing to do. And it will attract a certain kind of people. It will create a certain kind of work environment that we find much better than the alternative. Okay. What's next? The next thing that I mentioned, I mentioned the hiring process before. It's probably pretty much standard and comparable to what other companies do. We're happy to talk a bit about that in more detail later on, maybe in the Q&A if you're interested. But I want to highlight one particular aspect from the interviews. And that again is in contrast to something that we've experienced in other companies before, right? So, and still experience when we talk to some partners or to some players in this ecosystem. And that is the rule of not lying during interviews. Sometimes people are a little puzzled because we say so many negative things in interviews. I mean, we point out that we have to make compromises in projects. We point out that sometimes you have to do work that you don't like to do. We point out that there are some decisions that are not made in a grassroots fashion, but rather by the company's management. We say that some things are a certain way because that's the truth, right? I and my colleagues have never understood why somebody thinks it's a good idea to paint a different picture during an interview than what people will find once they start working for the company. What is the reasoning behind that? I mean, do you want to lure people to work for you because once they've started, it'll be too hard for them to quit? That seems like a completely stupid idea, right? I think it makes perfect sense to be as open and honest as possible during an interview because people will know then whether they want to work for you or not. If they make the choice, then they should make the choice out of conviction. They should be really, really sure that yes, this is exactly the job that I want to do. And the same should be true for a job applicant as well, of course. Lying during an interview will only create an expectation that you won't be able to fulfill afterwards. So why would you do that? It's best that both parties get to know each other as well as possible during the brief time that they spend together, and then make a decision whether or not it makes sense or not. Now, of course, this is luxury, right? This is all owed to the fact that people can basically choose employers, and also to the fact that we as a company are not forced to hire a certain number of people per year. I mean, maybe if we had this goal, if anybody at Inoki were incentivized and got their bonus only if they hired 20% more people this year, then maybe the motivation would be different. But we don't have that. We want to hire people who are, well, I hesitate to say a good fit because I don't hate that phrasing. I don't like that phrasing. But we want to hire people who have potential, who create value, who bring something new, who add some good to something that's already good. Whatever it is, whatever the reason is, we hire them. We want to be as open as possible, as honest as possible about the reasons, and we want to be as open as possible about the situation people will find afterwards. So not lying, again, makes good business sense. And it's also very good in your conscience because you don't have to justify why you lied or why you painted the picture differently during the interview than what actually happened in the what actually happens during actual work. Let me talk about people who used to work for us and about the way we treat them. We think it's a perfectly normal thing to leave a company. We like this company. Most people who work here like it, otherwise they wouldn't be working here. It's so easy to find work somewhere else. So we do enjoy working here and we do like the company, but it's okay if somebody, for whatever reason, chooses to leave. That is not an insult to the employer. That does not mean the employer sucks. It just means that at this particular point in their life, this person wants to work somewhere else. That might be for personal reasons, like back when we used to travel more. We don't do these days, but back when we used to travel more, sometimes people left because the travel got too hard. Sometimes people leave because they want to move from a consultancy to a product company, or maybe to an end user kind of company. Maybe they want to found a startup. Maybe they want to do their own thing. Maybe they want to go freelance. Everything's okay. That is not a problem. Never take this personally as an employer. That would be a very stupid thing to do. Things change and life changes, and that's perfectly okay. I also think that respecting leavers, respecting the people who want to leave, is actually something that that has a lot of benefit for everyone involved. First of all, it creates a better atmosphere for everybody because nobody stays out of fear. Like, what are they going to do to me if I go? Do I dare to talk? Well, nothing like that happens here, right? If that's what's up, maybe we can discuss, and maybe we have good ideas on how to make the job better for you, for your current needs. But in general, if somebody wants to leave, that's perfectly fine. And people who left, who know the company extremely well and work somewhere else, are fantastic in terms of networking. That is awesome. That's something every consultancy, every one of the classical management consultancies has learned a long time ago. They try to put their people into great positions at their clients so that they will hire them again. We don't have that sort of a Machiavellian master plan, but it still is a very, very good idea to be well connected to ex-employees. They might be able to, give you a referral somewhere. They might be able to say, well, maybe you might want to talk to this particular client. I've spoken with somebody at a party and they have this particular thing. Maybe talk to them because they would be perfect for your services. Those are all very useful things, and it's very, very stupid to get into a fight with somebody who wants to leave. It's utterly pointless. It'll benefit no one. So it's always a good idea to have people leave on good terms, to separate in friendship, to maintain a connection. And I know some of you watching this are ex-employees, so we still love you. It's perfectly fine. We actually do have some people who left and then came back. I know at least of 3. So that is something that happens, and I also think that is a very good sign. Okay. My next thing is something that I wish we had started earlier. I now think this is a very important, very critical thing, and it's one of the very few things that we're not 100% happy at InnoQ. I think we could be way more diverse, and I think, of course, this is true for the industry as a whole. But I don't want to use that as an excuse for us not being a more diverse workplace, right? We have increased the number of women who work here. We have some other typically underrepresented minorities among our staff, but definitely not enough. Way too many people here look basically the same, right? They have the same roots, they have the same gender, they have the same ethnicity. They're basically the typical kind of person that you would expect in an IT consultancy. Now, of course, that doesn't make them bad in any way. That's a stupid thing to even think, right? That's not what I'm saying. I'm just personally convinced that we all benefit from having more diversity, different viewpoints, different experiences. And we can see it. I think we can definitely recognize this since we've started increasing our efforts there, and we're definitely not done with that. We've added some fantastic people with different viewpoints. And we see that in the way people work with each other. We also see it in the way we work with our clients, with our business partners. It has definitely increased or has positive benefits on the way we work together, on the way meetings work, on the way we talk to each other, on the way we party with each other. I think it's a very, very good thing to be a diverse workplace. If we were to start a company again, we would do this from the very beginning, because it's a little hard to do that after you've not done anything in that regard for 15 years. It's a little hard to add that after the thought. It's like adding security or accessibility or anything to a software system once it's done. It's not impossible, but it's very, very hard. And if you can avoid it, you shouldn't do that. So if you're starting a new company, do this early on. If you're an existing company, make some effort. We try to. Again, we're never happy with the result, but that again is maybe something that is true for us as a company. There are a lot of things that we continuously want to improve and that we will probably never be happy with, because there's always room left to advance here. Here in this particular regard, I think it's a little more than in others, so we'll definitely continue to do that and value that very highly. Also, if you're a white male, you know, if you're sort of in the standard thing, I'm absolutely happy to have a discussion with you about all of these things, you know, just to convince you why it's a very good idea to do this, even though you might have some allergic reaction right now. I'm strongly convinced this is beneficial. Okay, so my final advice, my final tip here is, whatever you do, be authentic, right? So you can't copy somebody else's strategy here. You have to figure out what your own value system is, and then just, you know, be open about it and never claim something that's not true. That'll always bite you. You cannot wish things into existence just by talking about them again and again. That's not the way things work, right? You can do good things and talk about them, and that will reinforce the whole thing, because people who value whatever it is that you value will be drawn to you and say, well, that's the kind of company that I like because they do that. Then maybe they'll join you, and because that's the reason they joined, they will help you do that particular thing, right? So it reinforces, it's a positive thing. But you cannot claim that, for example, people are very autonomous, people can make a lot of decisions on their own, when that's simply not true, right? When everything that's of any importance has to be approved by centralized management, then you cannot claim that people have a lot of freedom and ways to influence things, right? You have to change it first before you can claim that happens. So we've sort of I think we have embodied that in everything that we do to the outside, with the outside world, right? In the way we consult, in the way we market, in the way we write and publish and talk. And that's something that's worked exceptionally well for us. So that's all I have. Thanks a lot for listening. I'll be happy to answer questions afterwards. And please do enjoy the rest of your day or evening. Thank you. Okay, so as you probably noticed, that part was a recording. I just sent the question reminder again to the chat, so we have a few minutes left. Unfortunately, I don't have a back channel, right? I can't see you or get I don't have any other way to get your questions than the chat, so that's the only thing. I do have two questions as I can see now. So the first one was, what do I mean? Oh, there are more than I thought. Okay, so what type of partners are we working with? So in general, we do have a lot of the standard business partners, like the suppliers and of course our clients. We do have some companies we cooperate with, so we do know some other consultancies that sometimes even do similar things to us, sometimes on a smaller scale, that we cooperate with because we simply like the people and like the work they do. We have some partners in terms of training. We do have a number of freelance consultants who occasionally work for us. We don't object to that, but we don't want to turn it into a business model. We're not a sorcerer. We're not the kind of company that would make its money by simply, having a margin, having some profit margin on, matching some demand with some supply. That's not our thing. We want to add some value. We do have some freelance consultants and some smaller companies we've worked with for a long time. And those are all very good relationships. We've had them for a long time. And of course, we also buy consulting and buy services in areas where we don't ourselves have the expertise or not enough of it, like graphic design or texts sometimes, or website design even sometimes. You know, we could do some of that stuff, but we don't have that many people who could do that. So that is something that we add. And that is my general rule, that partners are entities that you should always treat well. Right? It's just as important to treat your suppliers well as it is to treat your clients well. In fact, sometimes one might turn into the other in both directions, right? So it's a stupid idea to screw any of those partners. I hate it when companies misuse their power to make people lower their prices or something like that because they know they're dependent on them. I would hate it. We would hate it if somebody did that to us. We don't let anybody do that to us, and we don't try to do it to other people as well. A very interesting question, I think, was can I name examples where diversity has helped? One of the things that I have noticed is that since we started taking that seriously, we have a number of things that have changed, I think, in our collective mind. I hesitate to say a company has a mind, right? But we do have certain values and objectives and certain beliefs. Not everybody has to have the same ones. That's perfectly fine. We're all individuals. But there are certain things that become like, company-wide tendencies. A good example is the recognition of other factors than pure technology. Like, the human aspect matters. And I think that is something that's been enforced by the fact that the human aspect started to matter more to us when we became more diverse and had to integrate better, right? We're not all the same kind of people. We don't all watch the same TV series. We don't all have the same hobbies. We're not all the same kinds of people. And diversity expands that in many regards. It's diversity with cultural background. It's diversity in terms of gender. It's diverse in terms of ethnicity. Lots of different things. Things like the accessibility stuff that we do these days. Things that we care about. Those things these are all heavily influenced by the fact that we have more opinions, and that I think we now. And that is one of the things that I actually would argue is positive about being a little bigger, a little bit larger. We're a little more representative of what society is like. Not at all what it should be like, because we're still way underrepresented in many regards. Many underrepresented minorities are underrepresented among InnoQ staff as well. But it's become better, and I think it's helped us definitely. Would it make any sense to build and maintain products as an IT consultancy? So that question, I think, can be understood in multiple ways. So one of the ideas is always to build consulting products, to turn things we do into products. And I think we're doing that in some regards. Like, for example, the training started out by the fact that we tended to explain the same things over and over again. So we started at some point in time to create some material that we could reuse, and then at some point in time that turned into actual sellable trainings, right? That we could to a certain degree reproduce. No training is like the other. There's a certain, there's a slide deck, there's some knowledge, you've done it 20 times, so you know the material very, very well, and you figure out new things, so you can actually make a lot of sense of that stuff to different people when they ask their specific questions. That's I think, the good kind of product. For a consulting company, I think there's always also an interest to create software products, because we deal with software. It would be interesting to have our own products. I think every consultancy has that idea. We don't object to that idea. We sometimes do that. For example, at the moment we create a product management. Sorry, I'm a little confused with my terms here, right? So we create a PIM platform, actually a product information management system to manage products in, let's say, a retail scenario. And that is a product that we actually create to sell it on the market, but we're essentially just starting it, and once it gets enough traction, we would probably spin that off somehow, because I think there's a risk of doing too many things at once and wanting to be too many things to too many people, and that's always a risk there. So we try to minimize that and not confuse ourselves and have too many conflicting interests at the same point in time. So maybe the last one before we have to stop. Many developers want to do new projects with cool technologies and don't like to maintain an older application with a lot of legacy. Do we have older maintenance projects? Not really. It's not because we refuse to do those things. It's mostly because most of our clients consider us too expensive for those things. So most of the time we're brought in to change stuff, to build new stuff, to help do something that's new and innovative, which is kind of cool. We have fun with that. We'll not run away from the responsibility of maintaining something. We do have some stuff that we maintain, but mostly only if it's combined with new development as well. So I don't think we have, I'm not aware at the moment, maybe we have 1 or 2 people who work on projects where it's really basically about maintenance, but that is not our core business. We do want to put stuff in a good state. We do want to maintain a system while it's being introduced, run it a little while in production, or help run it to actually make sure that it really works, not just in theory and on paper. But we typically don't do many maintenance projects. Okay, with that, we're out of time. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you very much for the questions. I hope you enjoyed the day so far, and make sure to actually look at the last keynote, because I can promise you it's going to be awesome as well. Thank you, and see you around.